Hello, YouTube. In Ukraine, in the Odessa region, there's a small city or town called Belgorod-Dnistrovsky in Russian or Belgorod-Dnistrovsky in Ukrainian. Its age, 2,500 years, is similar to Rome, Athens, Damascus, Beirut, Beijing, Yerevan, and so forth. So it's an ancient city. It has no special attractions except for an ancient fortress standing on the shore of the Liman or estuary. Liman is an enlarged estuary formed as a lagoon at the wide mouth of one or several rivers, where flow is constrained by a bar of sediments, for example, as in the Dniester Liman. A liman can be maritime or fluvial. Now, some believe that Belgorod-Dnistrovsky, as it is known today, but previously known as Ackerman, which means White Castle in Turkish, and this was the Russian name until 1944. Well, some believe that it was built in the Middle Ages when the Moldavian sovereigns erected a powerful defensive fortification there. Others claim that this preserved fortification was built on the site of the ancient Greek colony of Tyras, and there are those who postpone the time of the origin of the surviving underground passages that permeate the entire city by a millennium before our era. Greeks also called it Asprokastron. Romans called it Album Castrum in Latin, and Jews who lived there called it Ir Lavan in Hebrew, meaning White Castle. But it was also known as Ophiusa when a Phoenician colony was established there, and it translates from Greek, or from ancient Greek, as the city of snakes. Well, for some, it's not worth going from afar to that town to explore it. But if you do decide to go on a trip to the south, to that part of Ukraine, then be sure to visit it, at least because of the Ackerman fortress and the ancient excavations. So we know that founded in the 6th century BC as the Greek city of Tyras, the site was mentioned by Strabo, Ptolemy, and Pliny. The ancient site encompasses the preserved remains of houses, paved stone streets, gutters, headquarters of a Roman garrison, and fortifications built of massive limestone plates, unknown anywhere else in the classical world. So, built in the Middle Ages, the fortress functioned as a military post for Byzantine, Moldavian, Turkish, and Russian forces until the early 19th century, with 3 gates, 20 towers, a defensive wall, and a moat. Tyras-Belgorod is the only remaining medieval fortress in southwestern Ukraine. Since 1940, Tyras-Belgorod, now part of the modern town of Belgorod-Dnistrovsky, has been designated national monument in the care of the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine and the Ukrainian State Committee for Architecture, Construction, and Housing Policy. Over the past 4 decades, restoration work has been carried out on the site's Greek remains, including the insertion of concrete supports along the estuary to protect the crumbling bedrock from further erosion. This is interesting that the work is being done in the estuary, and you will know later why when I get through with this video. At the end, you will understand more about this. Due to the lack of funds, however, an assessment of the physical condition of the entire site has never been carried out, nor has a comprehensive plan for shoreline stabilization developed. With this, it basically will be impossible to arrest the further decay, and the Liman and whatever it hides will be more inaccessible. Now, the Belgorod-Dnistrovsky fortress, according to stories, is teeming with ghosts and humanoid creatures that had attacked people. Let's start with a publication called The Secret of Underground People, which was published by Alexei Kazakov in March of 1991 in a digest in the Soviet Union. Very interesting digest. I will make some necessary explanatory comments. Later, we will look at another investigation of the same events to an extent. Mysterious shadows of underground people began to appear again on the territory of the Bessarabian town of Belgorod-Dnistrovsky. That's how Kazakov started his article. So it's too early to put an end to these mysterious stories that are connected with them. Strange incidents in Belgorod-Dnistrovsky began to occur shortly after World War II. 4 teenagers fishing at night on the shore of the estuary near the wall of an ancient fortress suddenly noticed by the light of the moon on the battlements next to one of the towers several human-sized figures, and on the heads of 2 or 3 of them were horns. A disabled person suffering from insomnia also told about similar figures whom once he saw through the window, and how he saw how at dawn the horned ones were by the fence of a house of an elderly Armenian woman, also known in the town for her orchard. The next morning, almost all the apricots and apples were gone from the trees. The number of strange incidents multiplied. The tank trailer with milk disappeared, which was often just simply chained to the metal fence of the park at night. 2 weeks later, an iron barrel on wheels was accidentally found. It was sunk in the estuary. So they took it, used it, and sunk it. The horned creatures or people were clearly concerned about the problem of food. No one doubted this after the attack on the driver of a local bread van, or bread delivery van. The poor driver remembered only strong hands gripping him from behind and the pungent smell of swamp, dampness, and something else coming from the unknown people. And he also managed to see shadows on the pavement in front of him. Those who grabbed him were horned with horns, bound with a bag on his head. A stunned bread truck driver was found inside his truck. The local Soviet police were at a loss. There was nothing to grab onto at all, because all suspicions about the locals doing it were dispelled. Soon another mysterious news swept through Belgorod-Dnistrovsky. A local sewer network fitter, a hero, he served in the Soviet Black Sea Navy during World War II, who did not take a drop of alcohol in his mouth, testified that one day, while fixing some kind of a problem, he, sitting in an underground well, heard voices underground, which gradually became more and more muffled. It looked like someone was walking underground. Alexei Kazakov said the city knew about the existence of a network of underground passages that converged somewhere in the fortress. According to one hypothesis, they were laid in the Middle Ages when Genoan people, that's from Genoa, Italy, and then under the Moldavian sovereigns, Russian and Ukrainian craftsmen built a defensive fortress on the shore of the estuary. According to another hypothesis, the birth of underground communications should be calculated from the time when the center of the ancient Greek colony, the city of Tyras, was located on the territory where the fortress still stands today. Some underground passages, the old-timers claimed, went out into the cellars storerooms, of which there were many in the town, but these exits were either collapsed or laid with stones. But in which part of the fortress were the doors of the underground passages, no one knew or just did not remember. It was even said that the passages broke off somewhere in the moat surrounding the citadel, but the manholes themselves were skillfully masked with turf and a shell stone. One of the exits of underground utilities led to the basement of Kazakov's Belgorod-Dnistrovsky relatives, with whom he often stayed. About 1967, with one of his comrades, they were both schoolchildren at the time, they decided to take a chance and try to walk through the underground tunnel, the arch entrance to which, human height, it was covered with garbage and broken bricks. The residents of the house were afraid of this place and kept their belongings in the opposite corner of the basement. It took them one day to clear the entrance. The next day, having stocked up on provisions, high boots and knives, Kazakov and his friend set off, lighting the road with buzzing dynamo flashlights. But all their careful preparations turned out to be in vain. 20 meters later, swerving sharply to the right, the course ended. They came across a wall of seashell stone from which the walls of the fortress are mainly made. The masonry was illuminated. It became clear from the gaps between the stones and streaks of cement that firstly the wall was made at least in this century, and secondly it was laid on the opposite side from them, that is, from the side of the fortress. Unfortunately, they did not resume any more attempts to find out anything, but Kazakov continued the story after the post-war events in Belgorod-Dnistrovsky. The locals at that time, they were really excited. What kind of horned creatures have settled in the abandoned underground passages? Or is it the devils themselves coming out of hell there? Or the souls of the tortured people in the fortress dungeons? And again, alarming signs were heard. Someone heard an underground knock. Someone passing by the fortress moat saw at its bottom the waving of huge thickets of nettles. Someone was moving there. This strange phenomena ended, however, one night. But this night was terrible for many Belgorod-Dnistrovsky residents. It was during the winter. The Dniester estuary was numb under the crust of snow-covered ice. The city, already quiet, had finally dozed off by this time. The snow was falling on the streets. The windows of the houses were closed early, and it was heard how fine and hard snow was ringing on the metal caps of street lamps. And suddenly, in the middle of the night, this peaceful silence was blown up or shattered. In the houses standing not far from the shore of the estuary, a rumble could be heard coming from under the ground, and it resembled the recent war time noises, explosions, and more explosions. As Kazakov's, now deceased grandmother told him at the time, that night they jumped out into the street in horror. Either an earthquake or a witches' gathering was taking place. An invisible battle was going on in the rumbling bowels which lasted with small interruptions for about an hour. Then everything went silent, and for many years it seemed that the silence would last forever. Alexei Kazakov listed various hypotheses for the explanation of the presence of the horned humanoids in the town. One of the exotic hypotheses belongs to British anthropologists Jeremy Cherfos and John Gribben. They believe that human evolution did not take place exactly as they write in today's textbooks. While not denying that man descended from apes, scientists at the same time believe that some species of apes in turn occurred from humanoid beings who once had only one step left to become human. Who was our ancestor with these apes? British scientists believe that it was the so-called Australopithecus, a creature that, as Cherfos and Gribben agree, was at the stage of development between an ape and a man. According to the hypothesis of Cherfos and Gribben, the picture of evolution was as follows. Once upon a time, several million years ago, the ancestors of the Australopithecus, in search of the more abundant food, left Africa, where they had previously lived, to Asia. Australopithecus began to look more and more like human being. They tried to walk on two legs to get food with the help of primitive tools, but suddenly it got colder in Europe and Asia, and the Australopithecus were forced to return to Africa. Once in the abundant food forest and restoring the ape skills or simian skills of collecting food and living in trees, these Australopithecus doomed themselves to just a purely animal state, and over time they turned into creatures that we call today gorillas and chimpanzees. Another part of the Australopithecus, suggest Cherfos and Gribben, got into treeless areas where the animals were forced to consolidate the skills of walking on two legs. They had to get food with difficulty, using stones and sticks. It was the harsh living conditions that contributed to the development of the brain potency of our forefathers and gave them the opportunity to embark on the path of Homo sapiens, the thinking, intellectual person. So according to British anthropologists, modern gorillas and chimpanzees are none other than our relatives who 4 to 5 million years ago took a step in the opposite direction of their development and could not become people because they got into too favorable living conditions. The assumptions of Cherfos and Gribben that Australopithecus could have lost the primary skills of human behavior and returned to the ape stage is doubtful to many. Most scientists believe that the evolution is an irreversible process. Theoretical studies and experiments on animals have shown that when animals get into unusual living conditions, they either adapt to them or die out. But the process of reverse evolution does not occur. As for the assumption that the Australopithecus migrated from Africa to Asia and from there back, paleontological data today just doesn't confirm this. Science does not know of any Australopithecus bone remains found in Asia. The remains were found only in Africa, but the well-known archaeologist and paleontologist Leakey also noted in his works that among the fossils of several million years old, a gigantic number of remains of humanoid creatures are striking. Surprisingly, many of them were found with skull injuries in the form of holes or cracks. An anatomist from South Africa, Raymond Dart, and Leakey does agree with him, by the way, believes that the fractured skulls mostly indicate that during the Pliocene and Pleistocene, apparently there was fierce competition between many species of humanoid creatures. In the struggle for a place under the sun, those who knew how to handle production tools and, more importantly, weapons, they survived. Often the properties of both were combined by club with a stone attached to it. it is suggested that the victims in the competition were Australopithecus, short, upright people about the height of a modern pygmy. In other words, the Australopithecus had to escape underground for their lives and did not degrade at all from a too satisfying and carefree life, as suggested by English scientist Jefferson Gribben. Professor of astronomy and space sciences Carl Sagan believed that our myths about dwarfs, trolls, giants are nothing more than a genetic or cultural memory of the times where different humanoid creatures fought among themselves for vital territories. No less interesting is another hypothesis, which was introduced to Kazakov by amateur researchers. You see, Kazakov managed to meet two local amateur historians who have been interested in this story for many years. The names of these people are Vladislav Chelpanov and Sarvar Sklyar. In their archives, these enthusiasts kept clippings from foreign sources describing similar events in different parts of the world. And there are many such cases in African countries. The comments of scientists, if we omit the discrepancies in detail, can be reduced in essence to two hypotheses. One of them I already told you about. The second one, summarized, is that the underground people are the children of terrestrial women conceived from alien beings, extraterrestrial visitors. The underground habitat is natural for this so-called by Kazakov half-breeds, and they feel great there. However, their very fate remains unclear, whether they're unhappy, abandoned children of the dungeon, or naturally distancing themselves from people. They study us without affecting the course of terrestrial events. As for the horns, then they are according to Chelpanov and Sklyar, this is nothing but years of those creatures in the underground conditions of existence. These parts of the body stretched out like rabbits. Perhaps such ears served underground people as a kind of locators, like bats, echolocators. And yet, what do the explosions, stolen bread, milk have to do with all of it? Well, the tragedy of that night was the result of an explosion of underground gases in those underground passages, possibly of methane, Chelpanov and Sklyar believe. Apparently the creatures had already sensed something wrong the day before. They went outside, tried to eat non-traditional foods for them, since the soil and all living things in it began to be poisoned by the seeping poisonous gas. At some fateful moment, a spark flashed when two pebbles hit each other, and it was all over. So perhaps the Transdniestrovian population of underground people just died out. Who knows, maybe that's how it was. But Kazakov has his own hypothesis. In it, however, there is neither exotic material nor mysticism. In August of 1944, a group of Soviet troops under the command of Lieutenant General Bakhtin, which included land and sea units, liberated the city of Ackerman, now Belgorod-Dnistrovsky, from Nazi allies, the Romanian troops. During these battles, an enemy mortar company was located in the fortress. Who knows, maybe by this time they managed to find out the entrances to the underground utilities and passages. And in 1944, not wanting to die or be captured, some of the Romanian soldiers and officers hid underground. It is possible that they hoped for a turning point in the war and wanted to fight in the Soviet year. Or maybe they were just deserters, but the war was lost by Nazi Germany and its allies. Hiding underground, however, it was like a preferred meek existence to this prospect of being court-martialed after surrendering to the Soviet authorities. However, it was necessary to live somehow, to eat something. By the way, about the uniforms, Romanian soldiers wore caps with conical elongated ends, so-called horns, which in the dark or with somebody with a poor eyesight could be mistaken for real horns. So, so is that what happened on that restless night for the Belgorod-Dnistrovsky residents? A conflict that ended in a shootout in a narrow space of an underground passage and the death of everyone who was involved? Or maybe the military arsenal of those who were hiding exploded, and with fragments of grenades and mines? Those who by that time presumably had lost hope of becoming a winner in that war, were they blown to shreds? Carelessness, suicide. I mean, you can go on guessing indefinitely. Or is the nature of this phenomenon different? That's not connected with the war, but with what Chelpanov and Sklyar told Kazakov about sitting at a table strewn with magazine clippings. Maybe even now our distant relatives live next to us in that part of the planet, but on that floor, so to say, skillfully hiding from us. They followed a different branch of evolutionary development. Or maybe there are those whose parents, at least fathers, were those who traverse the universe itself. Now, in connection with reports of the new appearance of underground people, there is hope that this mystery will be still solved. This is what Alexei Kazakov wrote in the digest translated to English would be Wonders, Mysteries, and Discoveries, issue number 3, year 1991. And then in February of 1993, the editorial office of the regional newspaper, in translation Soviet Transnistria, received a letter addressed to the editor by mail. This letter can safely be called sensational. The subscriber, the author, did not leave a return address. The author was a specialist in the field of history of archaeology. And here is a summary of this letter. Here is the text, with small abbreviations. And the original style was preserved by editors. Mr. Editor, I am a native from Ackerman, and all my ancestors were also Ackermanians. I have been living in another country for many years. This time I came to Ackerman. Sorry, I can't call it by its current name, Belgorod-Dnistrovsky. I'm not used to it. In connection with the death of my only sister, she was childless and lived alone. Having buried her, I'm leaving tomorrow forever, because the last thread that connected me with the town dear to my heart has been broken. However, who knows, perhaps it is your newspaper that will be the reason for my return here. And the thing is as follows. Sorting through the papers of my late sister, I found an issue of your newspaper, Soviet Transnistria, with a reprinted article by Kazakov, The Secret of Underground People. Being interested and reading this reprint, I was excited, and you will soon understand why. Yes, indeed, there were horned creatures and carbon monoxide, but not explosive gas. The roots of the story are so deep that when I got to them, I gasped. The story began in the Old Testament times in Egypt, 1,400 years before Common Era, under the pharaoh Amenhotep IV of the 18th dynasty. This is the same pharaoh whose wife was the famous Nefertiti, the one whose chief advisor was the Hebrew Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, whom the brothers had previously sold into slavery in Egypt. The Bible speaks about this in detail in the Old Testament in the book of Genesis, chapters 37 and 39 to 50. The 18th dynasty was founded by Yahmozeh, who expelled the Hyksos from Egypt, and the Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, translated his name means the only one who belonged to Ra, who ruled from 1400 to 1480 BC, is known in history for trying to break the power of the old nobility and priests closely associated with the cult of the Theban god Amon-Ra and other deities. At the heart of this cult was the veneration of the air element, the wind, any movement of the air. The keepers of the culture of Amon swore to the sacred bull Apis, the earthly incarnation of the ancestor of Amon, the ancient god Ptah. The priests wore bull horns on their heads. That's where this tradition came from. The pharaoh banned the cult of Amun and proclaimed the new state cult of the god Aton, which is a symbol and synonym of the sun. He called himself Akhenaten, pleasing to Aton. According to ancient sources, his wife Nefertiti, the beautiful one, came, in translation, who was not an Egyptian by origin, and brought the cult of the sun from her homeland, pushed him to this literally revolutionary step. According to one hypothesis, her real name was Tadohebu, and she came from Mitanniya or Mitanni, now Syria. According to another, she came from our territories, from Scythia. The Scythians, as is known, worship the sun. However, not everyone accepted the new god. Some of the priests of Amun yielded to Pharaoh. Some would hide, and the most irreconcilable ones secretly left Egypt, taking with them the treasure of the main temple of Amun-Ra in Karnak. This treasure, according to ancient authors, was the choicest, purest South African diamonds. Their value is determined by the current experts in trillions of American dollars. According to historians and archaeologists, the total weight of the treasure was 8 kilograms. The diamonds were packed in a specially made oval bag, made of denim-type fabric and impregnated with a special compound used in the mummification of the bodies of deceased pharaohs. This bag is eternal. It is not afraid of any external influence. That is why it has been preserved, as I am sure to this day. I will not bore you with links to the sources and documents that I used restoring this amazing story. I will list only the facts. The escaped priests, fearing the wrath and revenge of the Pharaoh, reached the edge of the world and settled there. According to suggestions, that is again our region, Scythia. After the death of Amenhotep, Akhenaten, everything in Egypt returned to normal, including the old religion, but the fugitives could not know about it, being so far from their homeland. To protect themselves from enemies and wild animals, they dug caves for themselves and connected them with underground passages. They did it for a reason. In their homeland in Egypt, it was generally accepted, escaping from the merciless equatorial heat, to go deeper into the ground. In the main temple of Amon-Ra alone, there were dozens of dungeons and underground passages. Centuries passed. The cherished bag was passed down from generation to generation, along with the cult of the sacred bull Apis and the god Amon-Ra, carefully preserved in this closed enclosure. After the construction of the Ackerman fortress, its defenders used part of the underground passages to communicate with the outside world during the siege. the descendants of the Egyptian priests paved new passages and arranged new underground dwellings for themselves. There are suggestions that one of these passages, in addition to the well-known ones, actually goes into the Scythian grave, the other to the island of Tiraget, now resting at the bottom of the Dniester estuary. It was in the depths of this island, according to some signs, that the treasure bag was hidden, for which a special lead box was made in the Middle Ages. As for carbon monoxide, it was reported by the Romanian professor Nicorescu, the founder of the Ackerman Museum of Local Lore in 1938. It was then that a group of teenagers did not return from the underground passage, and then the soldiers were sent to search for them. Later, their bodies were found. They suffocated. Apparently, they got into the non-working passage. The fact is that the existing passages are connected to the Earth's surface by slit-like ventilation wells disguised from the outside. They were periodically cleaned from getting sand into them and grass there. The non-working passage, clogged and forgotten, ceased its direct function, and carbon monoxide accumulated inside it, poisoning people. By the way, here's the information for geologists to think about. And I was excited because then, in 1944, I also, like everyone else, believed that every single one of the horned ones had died. But the publication alarmed me. Who needed it and why? Of course, I didn't tell you everything I know in this letter. I will only say that all the uninitiated who somehow penetrated into the secret of the treasure of Amon-Ra were killed by the descendants of the priests without hesitation. That is why the secret was preserved. I own the secret in many ways, except for the main thing. I don't know where the treasure is stored. By even the 10th of what I know is enough to be destroyed by those who, I have no doubt now, continue to search for the treasure. Whether they are descendants of priests or international adventurers, I do not know. I only know that the Genoese or Turkish archives could shed light on the mystery of the treasure seekers, where, according to the legend, detailed maps of Ackerman's underground passages are kept. And since there are maps, there are also people who have access to them and seek to use them for their own personal purposes. A few more threads leading to a solution, but I prefer to keep silent about them. For the same reason, I'm afraid to name myself and my place of residence. I hesitated for a long time and then decided to express my point of view. And the letter was signed Your Countryman. Kazakov confessed that he read this hypothesis with great interest, but suddenly the story of the underground creatures made a sharp plot twist, because in the early 1990s, after a long break, Kazakov visited Belgorod Dnistrovsky and tried to learn something new about those underground events from long ago. Also, he has not found any witnesses, and those vicissitudes are not reflected in the local history museum in any way. After some time, when Kazakov visited Belgorod Dnistrovsky again, he found out that the incidents with the horned ones not only did not stop, but even on the contrary, intensified. There's not much information about this except this. Let's consider the investigation of the Ukrainian researcher of paranormal phenomena, Igor Mecheda. Well, this also is from 2012. Here's what he wrote. In 1994, the media or press officially launched a project that he had been hatching since 1981. Mecheda conditionally called it the mystery of the 13th Thunder. The project was to explore ancient dungeons, legends associated with them, and places of power. All the information discovered in the course of these studies should be collected, analyzed, published in the media, which in turn should serve as material for films and TV shows, and ultimately serve as a reason for research and serious scientific expeditions to discover ancient secrets and present them to the world for a new round of civilization. This was the deep idea of the project. So Meheda repeated the story I just told you and added that, that Kazakov, who visited Belgorod-Dnestrovsky after some time, found out again that the incidents with the horned ones did not stop, but intensified. Meheda also added that this case remains unsolved, and he said that the letter from that Ackerman resident I read you was published in the newspaper Soviet Transnistria in February of 1993, and also in Vladislav Misyuk's book titled Legends of Bessarabia in 1993. Meheda added that there was also information in the press that the Ukrainian special services detained 2 Turkish agents in 1992 that were sent to investigate everything about the specified treasure, steal it, and illegally deliver it across the border to Turkey. That's what he said. Then he added that in the period from 1998 to 2008, many newspapers covered the events, and the most popular articles were in Komsomolskaya Pravda since 2004. As you know, I quite often quote Komsomolskaya Pravda in my writings and videos. After 2008, information about the events considered begins to appear in the internet. Meheda stated, it turns out, for example, that different authors mentioned the system of underground passages in different centuries, including people like the outstanding Ottoman geographer of the 18th century, Çelebi. Çelebi in particular writes that a cave was discovered in the fortress from which unnaturally large skulls were extracted. Well, superstitious Turks, they walled up those caves, and where the caves are, nobody knows till today. Other sources say that there is an underground passage from the town of Ovidiopol under the bottom of the Dniester estuary to its other side. It turns out that Misyuk's book was known by the staff of the local museum, but they do not agree with all the legends set out in it as yet. In some books, the author's surname actually sounds different, as Masyuk. We will never know the link to the sources. We cannot, because at the beginning of the 21st century, this writer, Masyuk or Misyuk, passed away, leaving behind a lot of books that contained various ancient legends. And the noise in the press Meheda wrote in 2012. This time included the internet media, and everything continues. Now they're discussing the origin of the notorious horned underground people, and there are several hypotheses. One, the Australopithecans that have survived to this day are one of the ancient branches of humanity. 2, the feral descendants of the Egyptian priests. 3, the fruits of union between earthlings and representatives of alien civilizations. 4, aliens are studying earthlings. 5, feral Romanian soldiers who got lost in the dungeons during the war. 6, representatives of another terrestrial civilization living in this world in parallel with us. Each of the assumptions is justified, and in fact is still only one of the hypotheses. But since 2008, according to Meheda, there has been a new wave of information about the fortress, now about the fact that its dungeons have been used by all sorts of secret orders of different centuries. He doesn't provide, background information or sources, but that's what he says. And that they contain occult artifacts. and that some structures of the fortress were built by masons using ancient Egyptian technologies, and that the gates to a parallel world open from the dungeons. All this the data given above has been collected by Meheda all these years as part of the Mystery of the 13th Thunder program. And of course, they couldn't help but keep him intrigued. And so in April 2009, taking the advantage that he was in Odessa on a business trip and lectured there, Meheda stayed a little longer, especially just to go to Belgorod-Dnistrovsky and see this legendary place. So he went there in 2009 and then in 2012, but basically found nothing concrete. I had to bring up this information. I have my own opinion about Igor Meheda's ideas, but you needed to hear it. Now, for the island, the Tiraget Island. At the place where the Dniester estuary is now located, there was a previously flourishing of blooming island. It was made by the labor of the Tiragetians who inhabited the island. However, the Romans made an attempt to capture the island and destroy the indigenous population. So the Romans landed at night. The sentry, however, managed to shout, and the defenders rose up to the defense of their home, but the forces were unequal. Then the Tiragetians turned to the river deity of Tiras. Clouds came, thunder rumbled, and lightnings flashed. An underground passage opened into which the population of the island descended. Then it began to rain so heavily that the Romans were washed away and drowned. The island sank into its depth. Again, this is Meheda's account. When the right time comes, the island will rise from the waters of the Dniester estuary, an underground passage will open, and the Tiragets will come to life and will continue to work and prosper. And he adds that let's pay attention to the similarity of this legend with the Russian legend of Kitezhgrad. By the way, you can find it in my videos. It's very interesting legend, very interesting story. And about the hidden cities of India and Tibet. And by the way, I told you about Tibet and the India and Mongolia and the underground cities and more than that. You can find that in my videos. So, some say that it's not worth coming to the town from afar just for the sake of seeing Belgorod-Dnistrovsky. But if you are in Odessa, to be sure to visit the town, especially since the road to the town will only take an hour and a half. And even though dilapidated, time-worn fortress still makes a strong impression. But be very careful and do not go to places where you can get lost, looking for clues to ancient legends. You know, through the years, I have told you in my videos about strange ancient tunnels in Eurasia. The twilight world of dungeons attracts explorers with many mysteries and enigmas. Basically, under every big city, there's a whole system of underground passages, especially where I am from. Basements and man-made caves that preserve history and urban legends. In my youth, I tried to learn more about the ancient tunnels in the city where I was born and lived, in Kiev, Soviet Ukraine. In the mid-1980s, I spoke with people who observed very unusual footprints and other things in the secret tunnels, inaccessible, under Los Angeles. And I have continued my research for decades. And you can see my video about this. I heard stories about underground realms while in Southern Africa and later in Mexico in my field research. Just telling you about fascinating and mysterious ancient tunnels and dungeons of Ukraine can take hours. But there are also a great many of them in Russia, and then there is China, Mongolia. As for the part of Ukraine where the Belgorod-Dnistrovsky is located, notes of travelers, monographs of scientists and local historians, reference books, guidebooks, poems and stories, painting by artists have been written about the splendor, sites and history of the so-called Aquileia or Bessarabia, as it was called too. But this topic is inexhaustible for archaeology. The search for new archival messages, the analysis and reflection. The region is basically not yet really studied, not scientifically comprehensively examined, and not that well described. Even the local population has a vague idea about the history and reaches of the region. What do we know? In prehistoric times, the planet was covered by the Tethys Ocean. The water covered the entire territory of Aquileia at that time. Millennia passed, the ocean retreated, leaving the Black Sea, sand, and countless mounds of clamshells. Time has turned them into the Pontic limestone, the shell limestone. Nowhere else in the world there are such reserves of limestone as in the region. Even the ancient Greeks, during the colonization of the northern Black Sea region, began to actively use this material for buildings. Later, catacombs appeared, which were used for religious purposes and for burials. Even later, during the period of the Turkish rule, a number of fortresses and underground passages were built by both the Turks themselves and the local population. Underground tunnels were previously dug in the area by Cossacks and the population so that they would not be caught by surprise by the Turks, getting the opportunity to secretly move underground to a safe place. Since then, Aquileia, Bessarabia, Bucak area has been focus of most interesting sub-areas, semi-underground temples, underground passages and crypts, quarries and mines. Residents of the Danube, towns and villages have legends, not without reason, about the existence of Turkish underground passages leading beyond the Danube to Romania. Underground passages are not a legend at all. They were identified not only in Kilia, Izmail, Reni, but also in the villages of Strumok, Novoselska, Arlovka. To this day, there are quarries in Arziza and multi-kilometer ones in the village of Deleni. Since the Middle Ages, underground passages have been covered with a tangle of myths, legends, and reality. That's what I wanted to let you know today, and I'll tell you more interesting stories about ancient tunnels in Ukraine, Russia, in Eurasia, and of course more paranormal phenomena as well related to it and not. If you like my research, you can support me in the links you'll find in the description to this video. Please like my videos, please tell others about my channel. Thank you so much for your attention to my work.